Mhairi Black, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be speaking in this debate, and I know it might be hard for others to believe, but I genuinely do try my best to understand where unionists are coming from in their defence of the UK as a union. And although I disagree with them more often than not, I always respect and accept what their position is. That's what keeps a democracy healthy, genuine, thoughtful debate. Now, today's debate is not about the merits of independence or the problems with independence. It's about whether Scotland should have another independence referendum. Now, although the two issues are intrinsically linked, it's important to keep that distinction in mind. The very basic principle on which all democracies are built is that it's for the people to exercise their democratic rights in free, fair, and regular elections to determine what the future of their country should be. Now, to an extent, this is a hypothetical debate that we're having today. We're weeks away from the upcoming Scottish elections, where people in Scotland will again exercise their democratic right to choose the future direction of the country. Now, if the people in Scotland do elect a majority of members on an explicit pledge to have another independence referendum, then it's no longer hypothetical. In that scenario, there should be another independence referendum. There's no democratic or moral argument to state otherwise. But ultimately, time will tell. We're all politicians. We know how elections work. It is for us to present the future we want to pursue, and for the people to democratically endorse which plan they want to see put into action. And no one has the right to stand in the way of that. It's as simple as that. But to focus on Scotland in particular, we did hold a referendum on independence, and a majority in Scotland voted to give this union another chance. Now, a lot has happened since then, and I'll touch on some of that later. But it's important to remember that there was nothing in the Edinburgh Agreement stating that there would never be another independence referendum. In fact, there was cross-party agreement that nothing contained in the Smith Commission prevents Scotland becoming independent in the future. I remember back then watching the debates where the idea of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister was laughed off. The possibility that Scotland would be dragged out of the EU against its will was dismissed as scaremongering. Since then, any attempt to say that there hasn't been a material change is wishful thinking at best. Now, I was elected to my current role on a manifesto pledge to hold Westminster to account for the promises that were made. Now, any suggestion that we're not respecting the outcome of that referendum is a futile attempt to rewrite history. Supporting independence does not equate to disrespecting the outcome of the referendum. We wouldn't be in the position we're in if we hadn't respected the outcome. It means that we know we need to work to convince others. And that's why I find it quite curious that the only people who seem vehemently opposed to a second referendum are those who are passionately in favour of the union. Now, to address specifically some of the arguments that have been made today, we've heard that Alex Salmond said it was a once-in-a-generation vote. Well, the last general election was described by the current Prime Minister as a critical once-in-a-generation vote. Does this mean that there won't be a general election for a generation? I assume not. And although he might not like it, Alex Salmond doesn't hold the authority on Scotland's future anyway. Now, on the second main criticism, that we should be debating health and social security and the economy, for me, this shows a complete failure to meaningfully engage with the arguments being made. The reason most people support independence is not because of nationalism or flags, but rather because they see the actions and the attitudes of Westminster. Our Scottish Parliament spends millions every year mitigating policies from the UK governments that it more often than not didn't vote for. But people are recognising that it's only by having the powers of a normal, independent country that we can actually have the power to deliver that radical change that we need, particularly in the context of our post-COVID recovery, because we're certainly not getting that thinking from Westminster. Now, the Scottish Government disagreed with Brexit. but it still produced a framework for how it could work. This was rejected by Westminster. Now, in the situation that Scotland ever did vote for independence, then the SNP does not and should not dictate what that future looks like. But unionist parties are actually depriving people of what their vision would be, and then decrying the SNP for being the only ones talking about it. Like I said, we want independence because we think it will give us the means to provide a lot of the responses we think people need to see. And like I said at the beginning, though, the issue of timing is undoubtedly interlinked with our constitutional preferences. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But it got me thinking, if Scotland was already independent and we were debating whether to join the UK, particularly in the aftermath of COVID, what would the merits of this union be? Power would be moved to a parliament miles away, where you will be in the minority. You'll rarely get the governments you vote for. Those governments will have the ultimate control over your economy, your borders, your social security. They'll actually dictate how much money you can spend and what you can spend it on, and you're going to have nuclear weapons in your waters, whether you like it or not. So in that context, the fear of another referendum becomes much more understandable. The events of the last 6 to 7 years have shown that the case for the union is paper thin. Now, I sincerely respect and welcome the fact that there are people who disagree with independence, but it takes an epic leap to then say that the matter should never be discussed again, especially when a sizable amount of people in Scotland consistently disagree. Ultimately, it is for the people of Scotland to decide if and when a referendum should happen, and it's our job to listen.